Alright, what we're going to do today, we're going to learn a little bit about like sculpting in Blender. We're going to learn a bit about particle settings and particle building in Blender. Learn a bit about materials and nodes and different rendering settings. So what I want you to do first is open up a new Blender file, open up a new general file. It should have this cube spawned in. We're going to get rid of that today. And we're going to press Shift A and add in a UV sphere. Alright, the first thing we're going to do is a little bit of sculpting, but before we go into there, we're just going to right click and click Shade Smooth, just to make our object smooth. Then once you've done that, select your object and head into Sculpting up the top. So in Sculpting mode, this is where we can manipulate our object with different tools that you can see on the left hand side. There's a bunch of them, and you're going to get a chance to play with all of them. But what we can do in here is, rather than going into each faces, we can make something that's a bit more fluid or a bit more sporadic or something a little bit different. So what we're going to do, we're just going to play with a couple of these and have a look at what they can do. So as you can see, if I click and drag on it, it is shaping it very slightly, but it's only doing very minimal. That's because my strength is like in the middle, so I can boost that all the way up here or on the right hand side here. I can also boost my radius of my circle, so rather than just affecting this little bit here, I can open up my radius and make it, say, a lot bigger and make it do a lot more, and clicking and dragging. Alright, so that's a type of manipulating. So you can click and drag and just affect the surface. Now you also got other settings in here. We can also subtract, so if we don't like something, we can click on the subtract button here and remove it and start again, or we can press Ctrl Z, or if you wanted to concave something. Now the other way of doing that is pressing down Ctrl, and then you should be able to go the opposite. So if you have subtract selected, pressing Ctrl will add. If you have add selected, pressing Ctrl will subtract. So Ctrl, click and dragging. Alright, so we can sculpt something a little bit weird and a little bit different. Alright, so at the moment we have this deformed whatever it is. Now you can see there's heaps in here and heaps of different things, and it just does different things for each single one. It's probably because I've got a huge radius that I can lower down and only affect a little bit, and maybe boost up the strength. You can see that it changes it and does different things, so you can see it's coming out there. And you can see, just come in here, and what I want you to do is I actually just want you to come in and play around with all the different sculpt settings, but notice that it only affects the view that we have on at the moment. So like if I'm in that view, it's only going to affect the sphere in that direction there. If I spin it around, you can see the sphere actually looks like it's untouched. Alright, so come in here, have a play with all the different sculpting and see what you can do. Make something a little bit weird. It's just playing with the settings. So seeing what each different one does. They're all different. And playing with these little settings in here. So don't just do it with the generic. You can come in here and play with the different settings in here to see what they do, because sculpting can become very handy for you. So have a play around with these settings. I've just had a muck around there. Doesn't matter what the end product really looks like, but I just want you to try and see what you can do with the sculpting tool, just to see how you can change a shape a bit more free form, a bit more less restricted, and you can kind of just do whatever you want with the different faces that you don't actually see. So you can just see what you can do. And that's pretty much sculpting. It's pretty simple. And then if we come back to our layout, you can see that that object's in there now. Alright, what we're going to do now is actually look at the particle settings. Be careful with this. This could potentially crash your Blender because it uses a lot of rendering power. So firstly, what we're going to do, we're going to press Shift A and put in a plane. And I'm going to keep it this small, just to lower the rendering, lower the amount that it has to do. Hopefully it doesn't crash my Blender. Now with our plane selected, we're going to go to down here in our particle properties, which is just below the modifier and just above the physics. So I'm going to click on that and press the plus sign. You'll notice in here that there is some settings, emitter and hair. We're going to flick it over to hair because we're going to make some grass today. So in here you'll see that there's a number of things that we can change. This will change the amount of different or amount of hairs that we have on our plane. However, I'm not going to change that today, just to keep it low so then the rendering doesn't stuff up. I'll change it later if we have to, and then we'll see what we can do. Then we've got our hair length. At the moment, our grass is 4 meters high. Our grass should never be at 4 meters high. So I'm going to put it at 0.3 of a meter. So make it quite small. And then we've got our segments. The other thing that I'm going to change is because all our hair is nice and straight at the moment, our grass should never be that straight, or never is that straight. So I'm going to press advance, and I'm going to come down here and find physics. And open that tab down and find Brownian. So that's going to change how the grass looks and how it stands. So I'm going to put that at 0.3 as well, and you'll see that it comes a bit more sporadic. Now, what else we need in here? Our grass at the moment has no texture, so let's add a texture to it. So if we go into our materials, press new, and change the base color to be a darker green, we can have that grass look. So if I come into my render mode, should see grass. However, I'm not happy with it. It might be a little bit too long for the size that it is. So I'm just going to resize my plane a little bit. And we'll go with that for now. Actually, I might change my number to 3000. Now, just because we're playing with particles, this is a good time to save before anything crashes. So I'm going to press Control S and save it as particle shoot. You can name it what you want. I'm just going to save it just in case it crashes and I don't have to restart. So we got grass in there. We got 3000 hairs. It looks really nice. Now what you're going to do is you're actually going to go back into sculpt mode, and I want you to create, well, with a sphere, I want you to add a sphere into this world. I want you to create boulders. I want you to make rocks. I want you to create a weird looking, not natural, or a natural looking rock that you can put into here. And I want you to put 3 in here, 3 different ones. So to get you used to the sculpting mode, making a natural kind of looking object of a rock. Then once you have done that, we're going to actually render everything out. Now remember, with rendering, we got to change our camera views, we got to change our lighting, things like that. So firstly, I'm going to move my lighting over to be on my actual object. Then I'm going to open up a new screen. And once I've opened up a new screen, I'm going to change this to be my camera view. And I'm just going to reposition the camera. Make sure that you reposition it so it has the boulders in view and also the grass. As you'll notice, it did stop responding here. Luckily we saved, so it shouldn't be a problem. All you can do, because we saved it, I haven't actually done a lot of stuff. I'm going to close it up, close the program, and open up that program again. So I just reopened it again. All that I changed last time was just the lighting, so I'm just going to remove that back into position and open up that screen again to see my camera, and then change from that view to be an active camera. Now probably if I had that view, my boulder should be in shot. I might move in a little bit so I can just see the boulder and a bit of the grass around, the focus being the boulder or the rock. So have a look at that, play around with it, see what you like, and say it was like just here and you had the rock in the middle here. That's totally up to you how you frame it. Once you've done framing, you've done putting it into position, you say you zoomed in and out, up to you. It's actually time for rendering, because this is going to be one of the render images that I want you to submit. Now, before we get into there, we got to change our render settings. So in render properties, at the moment we have Eevee, and I'm going to explain Eevee once we start rendering, and I'm going to explain what the differences between Eevee and cycles are. So I'm going to change that to cycles, and then once I've done that, let's go render image. Now, just like when we did our realistic cup, this takes a long time. So whilst we have this time, I'm going to talk about Eevee and cycles and what's the difference between them. So in terms of Eevee, it's an extra easy virtual environment engine. That's the definition for Eevee. Its main thing is that it's super fast to render. It's faster to render because it's not doing realistic like cycles. It's 12 times faster than cycles using the same scene and hardware. So if I rendered this out in Eevee, it would look actually quite different. It wouldn't look as realistic. That means you won't need to wait as long for renders to go. So if you're doing like a low poly, more of a cartoony styled Blender file, Eevee is the way to go. Quality. Due to the key difference between the two renders, Eevee manages to render your scenes with good quality. That said, it's not always better than cycles, especially for photorealistic renders. We're making grass in this instance. We kind of want to make it semi-realistic. Same when we did our cup last lesson. Ease of use. Both renders are pretty close when it comes to user-friendly. Finding one more intuitive or easier to use than the other greatly depends on your personal experiences with them. We find that most people will remain comfortable using cycles as it's widely used before Eevee came out. Cycles was the first one to come out, but like I said, it does take a long time for it to render out. However, you get a better quality image. So you just got to weigh that up. So like I said, just in summary, cycles is for projects that involve realistic scenery, such as house interiors, beautiful landscapes, the realistic cup, grass in this instance. Naturally, you have to give up some render time compared to using Eevee. So this is obviously going to take longer, but it will produce a better quality image. Eevee is better for low poly objects, which is something that we can look at in terms of just containing basic items can really benefit from Eevee. Low poly scenes don't tend to be photorealistic anyway, so it doesn't really matter if you lose that quality of render. So in terms of Eevee, when we're doing some low poly things, we will go through the rendering of Eevee. But if we're going to do a bit more realistic, a higher quality type of animation, 3D animation, we'll go for the cycles. So I just wanted to give you a bit more information about that. And then just as while we were waiting for my image to render out. So once you're done, you should have a nice rendered image of your grass with your sculpted boulder. Remember, I really want you to have a sculpted image in here. Once you've done that, you can save that image and put that into our Google Classroom folder. And you're going to add in a couple other things with materials in a minute. So once you've done that, put that in there. What we're going to do is that we're going to save our file, which we should have already done previously. We're going to do it again with your finished product, and we're going to open up a new Blender file. So open up a new Blender file. We're going to remove the cube, and we're going to add in our UV sphere. So Shift A, UV sphere. Before we move into nodes and materials and looking at that, we're going to actually do one more thing with our particles, which shouldn't crash Blender, just to show you what else you can do with that, rather than just doing like grass. It's a very narrow mind of it, but we can add some other things in there. So what we're going to do, we're going to select our sphere, we're going to go down to the particle settings, we're going to press plus, change it to hair. Again, we've got a nice big hair. I'm just going to lower the hair length a little bit so it's not as long. But what we can do, if you come up into object mode, you should see now particle edit. So if we come into particle edit, this is a place where we can comb our hair, we can smoothen it out, add some, lower the length so that it's a bit more sporadic in length rather than just all one length. Puff it out, cut it, or add some weight to it. So if we're adding weight to it, that's when it will, how it will react to like a simulated wind. So if we had a simulated wind in our Blender Blender, how would you like that to react to your hair? How would your hair like to react? So you can just click on these. This works very similar to our sculpt mode in terms of the strength and the radius, and you can just see, you can bring it over and brush it down and all that kind of other stuff. So you could just play around with it. See that the hair goes down like that. You can say smoothen it out, so it straightens it out in certain spots. You can add some extra hair in there. So instead of doing the manual one, you can add some length to certain areas, and then obviously puff it out so it's all sticking up again. We can kind of get it back to how it was before. And then obviously cut and wait, so you can cut it off, and it kind of just works like a razor, and it just cuts it straight off, right? So then you can have a look at in these settings as well. You can play with the hair dynamics, change the strength of that. You can play with the other kind of stuff in here, like the hair shape, all that other stuff. Have a little play with those and see what you can do. So if I cut that off, looks like a guy with long black hair at the back. Then I'm going to add like a material in there. Why not? Let's add some blue to it, and then go into our render options. You should see the sphere looks like that, but it doesn't look like anything is happening here. That's because we need to change our rendering options. Let's change it to cycles. Should see the hair. And if we go back to object mode, you should see the hair in there. Again, this could still crash your Blender if you're doing a lot of sporadic things. So if you look in object mode and go into render mode, you could see what it looks like. We're not actually going to export anything here. I just want you to have a crack at going into the particle settings, applying it to an object like a sphere, and then going into the particle edit and actually just play with those settings a little bit just to see what you can do. Other than that, that's all we needed to do for particle settings. Alright, so now what we're going to do, we're going to make some materials and have a look at nodes a little bit. Now, I'm not going to spend time explaining it in too much detail, as because there's a lot of videos on YouTube that are really good in terms of explaining nodes. And the one that I want you to watch is actually CG Cookie. I'll give you the link to this. I'll put it at the bottom of the screen now. So it shows you the video. I'll put a link in Google Classroom so you can have an access to that. He's very good at explaining 6 basic nodes, or 6 of the best nodes that you can use to make your materials in Blender. Now what we're going to do, I'm going to make a material with some of these nodes, and I'm going to make a lava material just to show you what you can make, to see how nodes work a little bit and get a little bit of familiarity with it. So firstly, what we're going to do, we're going to remove our cube, press Shift A, add a UV sphere. So the first thing that we're going to do, we're going to go into our modifiers, and we're going to add a modifier of a subdivision surface. Okay, and we're also just going to shade it smooth. So right click, shade smooth. So click on the object, right click, shade smooth, and smooth out our object. Then we're going to go to the object data properties, which is right here, and we're going to choose normals and make auto smooth. Okay, so it's just if we change anything, it's just going to auto smooth it. Now, to work in nodes, or working with shade editor, we're going to firstly split screen like this, just like usual, and then up here in the top left where it says editor type, we're going to change that to be our shader editor. So once we're in here, we've got a nice like grid area to work in. This is where we're going to place in our nodes. At the moment we don't have any materials on, so we're just going to click on our object very quickly, come down to materials and press new. And once you do that, you should see a material popping up in here, which is just this but into like this, and where we can add different stems towards it, and that's what we're going to do. There's a heap of nodes in here, and once you've watched that video, you'll notice that he just goes through the very top 6, but there's heaps in here that we can work with. And I'm going to get you, after we do this lava one, once we export that, I want you to make 2 different materials, and they could be one material that you research online and one that you just play around with and just see what you can do. So firstly, we're going to add in what we call an emission shader. Alright, and we're just going to put that over here. Once we've added our emission, we're also going to add another node, and we're going to get the mix shader and put that over here. So we're going to actually connect some things up first. So we're going to connect our emission shader to the bottom of our mix shader, as so. So they're connected at the moment. Our BSDF is going to go to the top shader of our mix shader, as so. And then our shader of the top right of the mixer is going to the surface material output, as so. I'm just going to open up this a little bit so we can go into render mode so we can have a look at that once it starts changing. So we've got a couple of things connected at the moment, and the big thing about nodes is all eventually interconnecting and making a bunch of different things. Now we're going to add another node. We're going to add in our noise texture. And we're also going to add in a color ramp. So add color ramp. Now for our noise texture, our FAC is going to the FAC of the color ramp. So FAC to FAC. We're going to change the detail to 16 and our distortion to 0.9. Now we'll see what that does in a minute, because at the moment these aren't connected to our shaders and everything else. So to add our color in, we're going to go color to the FAC of the mix shader. So now we can actually add some color. And you can see that we've made some noise texture in here already. You can see it's kind of making some swirls, kind of smoky. And that's based around our detail of 16 and distortion of 9. So you can change those and see what that does. But for this lava texture, we're just going to do that for now. Then we're going to come back to our BSDF and we're going to change our base color to completely black. So it shows off those landforms a little bit more. Then we're also going to change our specular to 1. Then we're going to change the color of our emission, because at the moment that's what's making it white. So we're going to change the color of that to be orange. And you can see that our lava is starting to form. It's not perfect yet, but we can change those sliders to something that we want. So it's starting to form. It's looking okay at the moment. Now we're going to change our emission strength from being 1 to 200. And add a little bit of glow to it. So I can change the slider to have a little bit less of a glow in there. Maybe less white in there and a bit more of that blending. So you can play around with these sliders to get what you want. At the moment it's looking pretty good. Now we're actually going to come back over to here and have a look at our render settings. So we're going to look at our render settings. So go into render settings. And we're going to do Eevee. Now, I already talked about Eevee in cycles, but we're going to make an Eevee lava today. And we're going to turn on bloom, as well as ambient occlusion. Now you can see that boosted up the look of it and made it more glowy, which looks really good. But we're going to just change those bloom settings so it's not as intense. So we bring it down a little bit. Still have a little bit of bloom in it because we want to have a little bit of a glow. We can maybe lower the radius and play with the settings a little bit to get what you want. It's up to you what you want. Alright, so our lava is looking quite good at the moment, but there's still more that we can do. So at the moment you can see that like our black doesn't really have any texture, and like if you ever look at lava, it's got a bit of texture to it. So we're going to add some texture to it. So back in our nodes, let's go add noise texture. Let's have another one. And this noise texture, the FAC, is going into the bump node. But we don't have a bump node yet. So let's add in a bump node. So go add bump node. So the FAC is going into the height. So the FAC of the noise texture is going into the height of the bump node. And then the normal of the bump is going into the normal of the BSD. So this normal here is going into the normal of the BSD. And now we're getting a little bit more texture on there, but the texture doesn't look right. So we're going to just change. I'm just going to move this around a little bit so the tree looks a little bit nicer. We're going to change the detail again. We're going to just make it 16 and 0.9 again. So detail to 16 and the distortion to 0.9. That looks pretty good to me. See that little texture that's coming into there now? You can play around with that settings and find that what you want. So that was a really quick tutorial in terms of how to make like a lava in nodes and how to use all the nodes to get what you want. It is complex. It's not easy to do, easy to find that you want, but there's no reason why you can't go into different tutorials and find what you want and manipulate those settings to get exactly what you want. So once you have finished your lava, we're actually going to render this out. This is going to be another one of your images. So render image, and it should be relatively quick because we have Eevee selected, and there you go. If we wanted a more high quality image, we would do cycles, but that's perfectly fine for what we need to do. So we can get image, save as, and you can keep that image as a rendered out. And you could even test out what the cycles look like in terms of how does it come out. See, it changes the image completely. So let's keep it on Eevee because that gets this kind of look that we're looking for. Alright, so that's a really simple lava texture whilst using nodes, but you notice how much nodes that took to get in there and a bit of complications in there. Now what I want you to do, you're going to add 2 more different spheres into this world. One of those spheres, I want you to just play with nodes. I want you to add random nodes in there and see what you can make. Just something different. Use that video that you saw and make one of those if you want, or just play with those settings. And then I want you to go onto YouTube or find a tutorial of your own of a certain material that you want to add to your add to one of those spheres, and go in there and follow the tutorial, play with the settings and manipulate the settings a little bit to get what you want. Alright, then once you've done, I want you to export those 3 materials and put those into your submission folder in Google Classroom.